The final day of each Tetris World Championships had always been enjoyable to watch, whether I was viewing it online as I had done in 2017, or in person like I had done in 2018. But 2019 looked like it would be the best year yet. Although we tried to show up early, Una and I barely made it in. If the line on qualifying day seems big, the crowd to watch the top 32 dwarfed it by comparison. Even with the entire room converted to seating, it was standing room only, with people crowded around the door for much of the day. At one point, I sat all the way over on the side on an extra foldable chair brought in by Burke T. Kenny, but eventually we were able to settle into seats next to Burke himself, the Beard World Champion, who told us about how he had converted his van into a mobile Tetris station. Fortunately, sitting near the midpoint of the room off to the sides ended up being the perfect spot to see the side stage and the main stage, which featured up to 3 matches simultaneously. For every round here on out, there was prize money on the line, and there were immediately some tough matchups. The 3 players from Japan had all traveled there together, touring the United States as a group the previous week, and 2 of them, Green Tea and SQR, now had to face each other. I remarked to Green Tea later that I felt bad that they had both come all this way only for one to have to eliminate the other, and Green Tea said, well, that's true, but the way they had chosen to look at it is that they were happy that it guaranteed one of them would advance. SQR put up a great fight with a 100,000 point lead for much of the second game, but eventually Green Tea prevailed 2-0. On the side stage, Microblizz was facing off against Jeff, the player made famous by the Boom Tetris for Jeff meme videos. But 3 games later, Jeff was out. Up on the main stage, Svavr was facing off against a 15-year-old whose name was Aiden, but went by the nickname Batfoy. The previous year, he had set a new world record for the youngest player to achieve a max out. After trading victories in the first 2 games, Svavr hung a long bar on the left deep into game 3, and suddenly he was out. Batfoy would be advancing.
If anyone has emerged as a top contender so far, it is definitely the 15-year-old phenom Batfoy.
Right above them on the main stage, Yanni defeated Quaid, who after topping out, stood up and threw his controller to the side in a dramatic exit. None of these players typically got eliminated so early. On the side stage, there was Harry Hong, the legendary competitor with the first verified max out on Twin Galaxies and one of only 3 players to ever win a world title, who was facing Matt. Hardly anybody knew much about Matt. He wasn't involved in any of the online tournaments or communities. Supposedly he had a max out, but it wasn't on video. However, he had shown up to the Texas qualifier event and earned a free trip to the World Championships after an unexpected victory. So he had to be at least somewhat good, right? Game 1, Harry had an unfortunate top out right after the transition, and Matt seemingly had it in the bag with a low board, but was unable to make up the small deficit, leading Harry to a shocking victory by barely 1,000 points. In Game 2, Harry made it a bit farther, but topped out at level 22. And this time, Matt was able to claw his way back and get the Tetrises he needed to even things up. Game 3 had an incredibly tight finish, with Harry clinging to a 1 Tetris lead on level 24 with a dangerous board. Matt was clean and Tetris ready, but lost control of the delayed auto shift to hang a long bar on the right and miss the Tetris. He would need another long bar now to have a chance to survive. Matt frantically dumped as many pieces as he could to the left, holding out for a miracle long bar that he was just able to get over the edge for a Tetris and take a tiny lead just as Harry had topped out. Somehow, Harry had been eliminated in his first match of the day, and Matt had shown that perhaps the Texas qualifier wasn't a fluke.
Oh! 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 Oh my God!
And finally, Paul Tessie versus Jonas Neubauer was surprisingly announced for the main stage. In the past, Jonas's early round matches had always been relegated to the side stage because they typically weren't very competitive. Paul had acknowledged in a tweet that morning that he knew he was a big underdog, but that he was going to do his best to not make it easy for Jonas. And it seems like he meant it. He started off game 1 with an insane pace, building a 100,000 point lead over Jonas by level 21. With over 600,000 points this early, he was well on his way to potentially get the first max out ever in the history of the tournament. Knowing his opponent, Paul kept up the aggression, but after a dependency on the left prevented him from being able to take any delayed burns, an 18-piece drought ended his game. And Jonas, well, there's a reason why he'd won the championship 7 times. games. He didn't need to watch Paul's match from the previous day to know not to take a Tetris when he didn't need to. With all the time in the world before the kill screen, Jonas took the smart route, getting singles, doubles, and triples to slowly chip away at the lead. But it still felt like unusually safe gameplay to see from such an expert player. Matt Bucco, who was sitting next to him, remarked, "Jonas, get a Tetris." And Jonas replied, "I'm warming up." He cut it close, but by level 27, Jonas had completed the chase down to come within one game of advancing. Not giving up, Paul dug in and went toe-to-toe in score with Jonas at the beginning of game 2, but a slight misdrop high up on Jonas's board seemed to mess up his rhythm with the stack, and shockingly, a few pieces later, he topped out. Already ahead, Paul had secured a victory to even up the set, with an acknowledging smile that he had been gifted a very rare situation. Jonas had such remarkable consistency that it had been over 6 years and dozens of individual games since he'd last topped out before the transition in a World Championships game, all the way back in 2013. This set the tables for Game 3, where early on, suddenly Jonas topped out again and unbelievably was on the verge of being eliminated. But it wasn't over yet. He had a 40,000 point lead and Paul had a pretty dirty stack. He set up for the most daring of dirty Tetrises and got it, chipping away, as Arda would say in the commentary, piece by piece, line by line, and then suddenly, it was over.
1.5 lines. There it is!
The vibe in the crowd was like we had just witnessed something unbelievable. Jonas had never been eliminated before the finals, and now he was out in the round of 32. Overwhelmed in the moment, Paul gave a victory fist pump, chugged the rest of his drink, and then immediately got interviewed.
Now, Paul, quick word here. How does it feel to eliminate Jonas from this tournament?
I'm still taking it in. I would have never imagined this, and I'm sure nobody else would have either.
This is certainly one of the most shocking moments in CTWC history, but it is well deserved.
On Jonas's side, though, I was impressed by his response to being thrust into new territory, dealing with an early exit. When talking to one of Jonas's friends later, I said, "Shoot, I hope he's feeling all right." And he responded, "Knowing Jonas, he's probably thinking more about if his friends and fans who are rooting for him are feeling all right." Doing something with a lot of eyes on you and sky-high expectations is an immense amount of pressure mentally. And after 2019, in a slim way, I felt like I could understand a small degree of that. In 2018, I was pretty anonymous at the tournament, and failing to qualify was pretty much just a letdown for myself. In 2019, though, because of my video talking about my experience in 2018, a bunch of people actually recognized me and told me they really hoped I would qualify, which was super nice. But it also meant that after I blew it on the main stage, I just wanted to go be by myself and not really talk to anyone. But instead of disappearing, Jonas stood up to applaud Paul as he completed the chase down, gave him a hug, and would end up joining the broadcast booth to commentate for the rest of the early rounds.
First, I want to say I'm not retiring to become a commentator. This is how the circumstances played out. So I know everybody's worried about it. Usually, no one's watching my round 1 game. I can just kind of, micro choke on my own and work it out. But it's center stage, kill screens, 800,000 scores in round 1. It's unheard of. Luckily, I get to be a spectator now and really root for all these players. I'm looking forward to that.
Now that Paul had advanced, his next opponent was the young prodigy Batfoy. Again, in Game 1, Paul put up a staggering pace with a 150,000 point lead, threatening to max out. But a moment of perhaps lost dash control on level 24 caused a chain reaction of pieces snagging in the center. Much like Jonas, Batfoy had a modest lead to chase down with plenty of time. But unlike Jonas, he did it with straight Tetrises without seeming to break a sweat. In Game 2, Mega Retroman topped out early, and just like that, Batfoy had advanced again. I think there's no better example of how brutal the tournament was this year than the fact that you can pull off the upset of a lifetime against the 7-time world champion, and the very next round be eliminated by a teenage rookie.
Tell us about how much you grinded this game and how much practice you put in for this moment here.
At least 3 to 4 days a week, 2 to 3 hours, and just go, go, go.
So what was practice like coming here? How often did you play the game before this tournament?
I usually don't play that much, usually just a few times a month, but
Over on the side stage was Matt Bucco, dubbed the People's Champ with perhaps the most dedicated fan base in the sport, who had upset the 2014 champion Harry Hung in dramatic fashion 2 years ago, and was one of only a handful of competitors to have played in every year of the tournament, facing Matt. In the Battle of Mats, it was the well-known versus the unknown. In Game 1, Bucco built up a high perfect stack but made a single misdrop in the middle of a huge drought and couldn't skim, topping out in disbelief after just 26,000 points. In Game 2, it was the other Matt's turn to top out early, feeling his long bar dependency right as a long bar came. In Game 3, with everything on the line, both Matts buckled in and managed to survive until the transition. But in the middle of getting droughted again, Bucco got stuck with a split stack and cut off his well. Unable to access the left side of his board, he topped out, but it wasn't over as he had a small lead. The other Matt hung a long bar over as well, and just like versus Harry, would need another one to survive, and he got it and clutched the Tetris to barely pull off the victory and advance again, taking out another top player. Forget about the YouTube dancing sensation Matt Harding from the series Where the Heck is Matt? The CTWC now had its own sensation. Who the heck is Matt? And wouldn't you know it, the two surprising players would end up duking it out in the top 8, which was now being commentated by James Chen and Chris Tang. Matt continued to play with rock-solid consistency, and like a seasoned politician, Batfoy delivered spin after spin to get out of tough situations. After trading the first 4 games with 2 wins each, in Game 5 they had an incredible moment of synergy where they made the exact same piece placements for their first Tetris.
Are they both gonna Tetris at the same time in the same way? Oh, boom! Tetris!
Identical playfields.
But Batfoy then jumped out to a big early lead, and Matt got stuck in a dig waiting for a long bar that just never seemed to come at the right time, and Batfoy took Game 5 to advance. Matt's run was over, but he had a day to be proud of, defying everyone's expectations to make it within 1 game of the semifinals. I got to talk to Matt later that day and found out that he already had 10 max outs, and his plan was to fly under the radar as much as possible so that people would underestimate him. It seemed to have worked out pretty well. Dressed in his full Tetris piece costume, Josh Tolles made his way to the main stage to face Dan QZ, and they had an amazing back and forth match that went all the way to a decider. Despite some crazy gutsy center wall play from Josh, he would eventually top out in Game 5 and Dan QZ would end up advancing. At nearly any other moment, the entire crowd would have exploded at their match, but they happened to be playing at the same time as the marquee matchup of the day, Joseph versus Green Tea. In Game 1, Green Tea threw up a monster 900,000 score, and Joseph responded by trying to go for a Tetris on level 29, but misdropping and coming just short. In Game 2, knowing he needed to score higher, Joseph got a max out on level 26, finally getting the first in-competition max out ever, and prompting Green Tea to say, "Are you kidding me?" He was well over 200,000 points behind, and shortly afterwards he would hang 2 long bars and top out, evening things up. With the match now tied 1-1 and both players knowing they would need to be at the top of their game for a chance at victory, the stage was set for Game 3. Scoring nearly 600,000 points before the transition, Green Tea built up a massive early lead, almost 100,000 points ahead of Joseph, who just barely made 2 critical hyper taps to keep his stack manageable. But slowly, Green Tea's lead would evaporate and they would be nearly even going into the final levels. Joseph got a Tetris for the back-to-back max out just 1 game after it had been done for the very first time. But almost immediately afterwards, he misdropped, opening the door for Green Tea to come back. But maybe under the pressure of the moment, Green Tea suddenly had a few misdrops and needed a long bar for the Tetris and hung the long bar, but got another one and clutched out a quick tap to get the max out. A quick tap is one of the most difficult moves in NES Tetris, and Green Tea had gotten one to save himself against Jonas in 2018. 1 year later, he had gotten another one in an almost identical situation, but with much higher stakes.
Now he needs a long bar.
There it
There's
is.
a long bar. Oh no!
Tetris for Green Tea.
Double max out.
out. Oh my goodness.
What is happening?
With the crowd exploding and the score nearly tied, Joseph built up a frantic Dirty Tetris to give himself some breathing room, while Green Tea tried to push across a few more lines, and Joseph almost got an insane left well Tetris before topping out. He had gotten just enough points for a Game 3 victory, but that didn't even seem to be the focus of the moment. Joseph and Green Tea had jumped up to hug each other in mutual respect, as with the double max out, they had just broken the combined score world record for a CTWC match by a large margin. Green Tea built up another massive lead in Game 4, but ended up topping out early, allowing Joseph to chase down the score in advance, in a matchup that seems like it could have happened in the finals if they hadn't both been seated on the same side of the bracket. But things weren't gonna get any easier for him. Next up in the semifinals, he would face Dan QZ, the fellow hypertapper. But as the tournament was progressing, Joseph was only seeming to get better. After taking the first 2 games, Joseph continued to pour on the pace in Game 3. When a commentator announced that Joseph had over a 100,000 point lead, Dan remarked, Dan's comments about his opponents always seemed to come on games he actually won. Joseph would top out shortly afterwards, opening the door for Dan to get on the board with a victory. But one early top out later, Joseph had managed to clutch out another trip to the finals. Upon being asked about the other semifinals matchup, Corian versus Batfoy, Joseph replied,
Batfoy, please win.
His request would be a tall order. Corian and Batfoy had faced each other several times in the monthly online tournaments, and Batfoy had never won even a single game. And going into Game 1, it seems like the theme would continue. Corian threw up a dominant 900k score going into the kill screen with a staggering lead of almost 300,000 points. Batfoy was already on level 28, and the score deficit would be impossible to make up. Game 1 to Corian. But Batfoy didn't give up, and his persistence paid off in Game 2 when Corian topped out past the transition, and suddenly Batfoy was on the verge of his first ever game victory versus Corian.
Come on, give it to him.
In Game 3, he stayed within a Tetris of Corian until the very end, when Corian pulled away to take a 2-1 match lead. In Game 4, Batfoy again put up a fight, but a misdrop in the middle of a 26-piece drought caused him to top out. For the first time, Corian had managed to make it to the finals. And even though Batfoy's day was over, he had had an incredible run, making it further than any other non-hypertapper. His performance would later end up getting him a full-on feature by his local news station in Minnesota. As he made his way off the stage, Batfoy continued his signature nonchalant reactions to everything. When players congratulated him and excitedly told him his Twitch page was definitely gonna blow up now, his response was, "Oh, well, I don't stream that much." And then a very special guest was invited up to the main stage to announce the finals. This moment felt incredible, as in the past Alexi had only appeared occasionally in the form of a pre-recorded video message. But over the course of 10 years, the tournament had grown to the point where the creator himself had finally come out to be involved in person. And when Arda Okal asked him if back in the 80s in the Soviet Union, when he originally programmed the game, if he could have ever imagined it being played at this level for this kind of audience, he responded,
"Just in my dreams."
Alexi told the players to get ready and then led the loudest countdown of the entire day.
And everybody, 3, 2, 1.
Joseph and Corian proceeded to have possibly the funnest finals match ever. Someone behind me called out for them to do some pushdown points, and they obliged. Someone called out for Joseph to do a hair flip. For one game, like Matt and Batfoy, they started stacking identically all the way until their first Tetris, cheering each other on all the way there. James and Chris remarked on the commentary,
Amazing that, both of these players want to win this badly, but at the same time
They're having so much fun.
past the transition in Game 1, Joseph got stuck in a tough dig, twice getting a critical pole vault with a J piece, but eventually things got too high, and a misdrop ceded Game 1 to Corian. In Game 2, Corian had a solid 3 Tetris lead going into the transition, but he missed a flip with a long bar for a Tetris that blocked his well and caused him to top out, evening things up. It was an especially tough moment for Corian, as this was something that had plagued him in past tournaments, leading him to remark later on Twitter, "It's become an annual tradition to miss turning the stick." In Game 3, Joseph was leading by 2 Tetrises at the transition, and again, both players knew what the other was capable of. So Corian set up a very dirty left wall Tetris, but a misdrop prevented him from being able to burn, and just like that, Joseph was up 2 games to 1. Game 4, Corian was taking no chances. Despite being down 2 Tetrises again at the transition, he played it safe, burning his stack down and taking a deep breath to adjust to the speed change with a comfortable low board. And the safety paid off, as Joseph topped out in the middle of level 25, giving Corian plenty of time to chase down the remaining deficit.
Just go for the doubles. Yeah, look at that. One more.
Joseph applauded as Corian celebrated, making it within 1 game of the title. Even Alexei Pajitnov himself was on his feet in applause. For the first time in 6 years, there would be a winner-takes-all Game 5 in the finals. Early in the middle of Game 5, Corian got stuck up in a burn up high and ended up somehow getting Tetris ready, and this time he didn't miss the crucial long bar flip and got a Tetris to the roar of the crowd. But moments later, he wasn't quite sure what to do with an L piece and suddenly was on the ropes. He got set up for an even higher elevated Tetris but needed to burn it down, and perhaps from the exhaustion and tapping all weekend, he couldn't get a T piece over to the side and ended up topping out. Joseph shook his head. With only 8,000 points to chase down, he could win it with a few singles, but he opted to finish things in style. With the Tetris, Joseph would become the back-to-back world champion. Corian got up and gave Joseph a congratulatory hug. And shortly afterwards, Joseph was embraced on the stage by his dad, who was wearing a shirt of his son at his first Tetris World Championships. Afterwards, it was time for the awards ceremony. Arda handed over the mic to Alexei.
That was great. That was absolutely incredible. It's all yours.
If 2018 was the year that changed everything, 2019 was the year that showed how everything had changed. The field was more talented, more diverse, and more unpredictable than ever. The one thing that hadn't seemed to change was the overall culture of good sportsmanship and the mutual respect of each other's accomplishments. After an incredible weekend once again, it was time to go home. But the scene wasn't done evolving, not by a long shot. So the epilogue for this year is, well, bittersweet. It was set to be the biggest year yet for in-person events, but of course, for the health and safety of everyone involved, everything had to be canceled. I think 2020's been a tough and anxious year for just about everyone. And if there's any silver lining I can see in all of this, it's that it's happened in a year that the community was better prepared to stay together than ever before. In the couple of months between the 2019 tournament and the quarantines, a lot of CTWC veterans finally made their live streaming debuts on Twitch, such as Josh Tolles, Quaid, and Jeff Moore, along with the new faces of Tetris as well, such as Matt Martin. The NES Tetris YouTuber community started to really take off, with ESPN SportsCenter-esque news videos from Sharky, explanation videos from Eric ICX, parody videos from Anthony Ho, and an amazing series from AMJ Productions documenting his own experience going to the 2019 World Championships, which I definitely recommend checking out. NES Tetris Media started to appear in other genres too, such as a website with news articles from Wingfryer, comics on Twitter from Danny Sharkey, and the Peace Dependency podcast from Sir Mazer. A lot of top pros from other disciplines became serious NES Tetris players, such as Laser Monkey from Speed Cubing, Evelyn from Poker, Remainings from Roblox, and Jaws from Skateboarding, who was actually in the audience for 2019 next to Alexei Pajitnov. And I think this is special. 2019 is the year that inspired all of the commentators to start playing themselves. Chris Tang, the voice of the CTWC since year one, hadn't played NES Tetris regularly in decades, but he started playing seriously again at the beginning of 2020 and managed to beat his old childhood personal best of 500,000.
Yes! God, yes, finally!
James Chen started practicing on his Twitch streams, and even Arda Okal busted out his NES in January, starting in his words from the rock bottom, and followed up with significant progress. And players who had only ever been connected to the community online started to have a chance to shine, with the Classic Tetris Monthly exploding in popularity. Green Tea managed to reorganize the first planned Japan tournament into a successful online event, and shortly afterwards was hired by Enhanced to incorporate a classic score attack mode into Tetris Effect Connected, marking the first time competitive NES Tetris matches had been included in an official modern release of the game. At the same time, Trey Harrison, Zeal, and Yobi developed further tools to improve NES Tetris gameplay capture and make it easier to play online matches with original equipment. Chris Higgins finally had the time to be able to get the ball rolling on finishing his documentary about the 2014 World Championships. The PAL Tetris scene continued to grow with its own monthly online tournaments. Jonas Neubauer showed he was still at the top of his game, defeating Joseph in a special friendly contest to get the highest score within 45 minutes. And the bar has been raised ever higher for the level of talent and competition, with the number of max out players ballooning to more than 300. I'm reminded of the video John Green made 3 years ago, right around the time of the 2018 World Championships, which feels even more relevant today.
So why is humanity suddenly getting better at Tetris? Because a group of enthusiasts built spaces, both online and off, that allowed people to connect with each other over what is usually a very solitary hobby.
The last phrase really gets me because it's crazy to look back in retrospect now at the very first documentary, which was about a handful of people who mostly played by themselves, only vaguely aware of each other's accomplishments and what was possible in the game. With all of the collaborative record-keeping projects nowadays, there's definitely been more research into NES Tetris over the past 2 years than the previous 30 years combined. I've really enjoyed getting involved in the Discord servers over the past year, not just for the fun daily chats, but for the sense of camaraderie and support I've seen among so many community members through the ups and downs of such a turbulent time. In my experience at the 2018 Championships video, I remarked that it was a magical moment seeing everyone in person. But probably the first magical moment I had was first after watching Ecstasy of Order in 2017, looking up the players online and finding out Harry Hong had a Twitch page and he was live at that very moment. Immediately in the chat, I was talking to the movie star I had just watched the hour before. So if you have a favorite player, or someone you just want to say hi to, I've included the links to the Twitch streams of every CTWC competitor from 2019 in the description. And as a fitting finale to 2020, the World Championships were by far the biggest ever, with double elimination brackets and the most talented pool of players by a large margin. The biggest thing missing, honestly, was just the roar of a live crowd, since by necessity they had to host the tournament online. But since I wasn't going to be able to film a normal CTWC experience video for this year anyways, I decided to do something about that. I was invited into a large group video call with many of the players in the brackets, and as we watched the CTWC live together, I recorded our reactions to all the biggest moments, with some of the reactions coming from the players themselves both during and after their matches.
Keep your left side.
Stop it, you
out,
did.
GG. They did.
No, I'm trolling. Wait, no! I'm not gonna pop out now. No shot.
It's something I can't wait to share once it's all edited. And as tough as 2020 was at times, 2021 got off to an even sadder start, with the tragic news that Jonas Neubauer had passed away due to a sudden medical emergency. A few months later, word was received from the family of Pepe, a player in the 2020 World Championships, that he had also passed away. Their absence is going to be felt at every World Championship in the future, and it's been a reminder to value everyone in the community while we can. It was definitely on my mind as small in-person events started to happen again in 2021, which mostly consisted of people who had never been to in-person events before. The communities that have formed and the gatherings that have made tons of long and lasting friendships will always be a part of their legacy. And now we're on the verge of determining another champion, as the 2021 World Championships are coming up imminently. Who's gonna win this year? I have no idea. Maybe it'll be one of the players using the new rolling play style. But in a way, I think we'll all get to win by being able to watch. So here's to the next CTWC. 2021, bring it on.